The marketplace was bustling with life, filled with aliens of all shapes and sizes, their voices blending into a chaotic symphony. Jack, a human soldier, walked through the busy streets of the alien city, taking in the strange sights and sounds. He had been on countless missions before, but this place felt different. The air was thick with mystery, and he couldn't help but feel a little out of place, even though he had seen many worlds before. Jack wasn't here on official business. No, today was his day off. He'd come to explore, to see how the other races lived. He was walking past a merchant's stall when a soft voice caught his attention. "I can't believe they're still talking about that war," the voice said, filled with both awe and excitement. Jack turned his head to see a young alien girl standing nearby. Her skin was a deep shade of blue with golden markings running across her arms and face. Her large eyes were bright, and her expression was one of pure excitement as she looked at a group of older aliens gathered in a circle nearby. They were all listening to her intently. "Did you hear? They say our people once fought beside the greatest warrior in the galaxy. He fought in the war against the invaders, and he never lost a battle," she continued, her eyes wide with wonder. The older aliens in the group nodded, clearly pleased with her enthusiasm, but Jack, who had overheard her words, felt a sudden pang of curiosity. He had heard about this war before, a long and terrible conflict that had left scars on the galaxy, but he had never thought much about the stories that had been passed down through generations. Intrigued, Jack approached the girl. She didn't seem to notice him at first, so he took a step closer. "That's quite a story," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. The girl turned, surprised, her bright eyes meeting his. "Oh, you heard that? Isn't it amazing? Our ancestors fought bravely, and they helped end the war. It's the greatest legend of all." Jack smiled softly. She was so full of energy, so full of hope. Her words carried the passion of someone who had never experienced the horrors of war firsthand. She didn't know the full story. To her it was just a legend, something to be proud of, something that made her people feel strong and noble. "Was in that war," Jack said quietly, his voice steady. His words fell into the silence that had suddenly surrounded them. The girl blinked, her mouth opening slightly in confusion. "You were in the war, but ... you're human." Jack could see the disbelief in her eyes, and for a moment he wondered if she thought he was lying. He had heard it many times before. Humans weren't supposed to be part of that war. They weren't supposed to be the ones who changed its course. But Jack had been there. He had seen the horrors, the sacrifices, the way humanity had been forced into a conflict they never wanted. He had fought on the front lines, watching comrades fall, battling against enemies who seemed unstoppable. "Yeah," Jack said, looking away for a moment, his mind wandering back to the battlefields. "I fought in that war, and I've seen things that ... well, things you wouldn't believe." The girl's eyes widened even more. "You ... you saw the invaders? The ones who attacked our world? But ... how could that be? You ... you're so young. That war happened so long ago." Jack let out a slow breath. The memories of that time still haunted him, even after all these years. He had only been a young soldier back then, barely out of his teens, thrown into a conflict that seemed endless. He remembered the sound of explosions, the cries of those who had fallen, the way the sky had turned dark with smoke and fire. The war had lasted for what felt like an eternity, but in reality, it had only been a few short years. And yet those years had been enough to change the fate of entire civilizations. "You'd be surprised," Jack said, his voice distant now. "The war ... it changed everything. It brought people together, but it also tore them apart, in humanity. We weren't the heroes everyone thinks we were. We just did what we had to do to survive." The girl looked at him with fascination. She had never met anyone like him before. She had heard the stories, of course, but never had she come face to face with someone who had actually lived through it. Jack could see her mind racing, trying to make sense of it all. But why didn't anyone tell us?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. "Why isn't this part of our history?" Jack sighed, a bitter smile forming on his face. "History ... it's always written by the victors, isn't it? Sometimes the truth gets lost along the way. If the stories you hear, they're only part of it. There's so much more beneath the surface." The girl stared at him, her mouth opening and closing, as if she were about to say something, but couldn't find the words. Jack could tell she didn't fully understand yet, but something had shifted. She had heard the echoes of a truth she wasn't ready to face. "I need to know more," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can you tell me about it? About what really happened?" Jack thought for a moment, his eyes scanning the crowded marketplace around them. This wasn't the place for a conversation like this, but he couldn't ignore the girl's genuine curiosity. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to share the truth. To show her that the past wasn't always as glorious as it seemed. "All right," he said, nodding slowly. "But we're not going to find the answers here. Follow me." The girl's face lit up with excitement. I'll follow you anywhere." Jack led her through the marketplace, the weight of the past pressing down on him. He didn't know what this girl would learn or how it would change her. But one thing was certain. The truth was coming, whether she was ready or not. Jack led Lyra through the crowded streets of the alien marketplace, away from the merchants and loud chatter. He needed to get somewhere quieter, somewhere they could talk without being interrupted. He had seen so much in the war, and the weight of those memories still sat heavy on his shoulders. They walked for a while, passing alien buildings that seemed to glow with soft, warm light. Eventually, they reached the outskirts of the city, where the tall, shining structures gave way to more natural surroundings. The path ahead was lined with tall trees and patches of green grass, and the air smelled fresh and crisp. It was peaceful here, a stark contrast to the memories Jack carried with him. They reached a small, quiet park with a bench beneath a tree. Jack sat down first, looking at the ground for a moment before meeting Lyra's gaze. "You wanted to hear?" "About the war," Jack began. His voice was steady but distant. "But be warned, Lyra. It's not a story full of glory and honor. It's not something that should be celebrated." Lyra sat beside him, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I want to know the truth," she said softly. "I've only heard the stories, the legends. But I need to hear it from someone who lived through it." Jack nodded, taking a deep breath as he prepared to open a door to a past he had tried to forget. "All right, but it's not going to be easy to hear." The scene shifted in Jack's mind, and for a moment it felt as though he was back there. Back on that hellish battlefield. The battlefield stretched out before Jack, endless and covered with smoke and fire. It was the year 2274, and the war was at its peak. The enemy, a massive alien force, had descended upon the galaxy with a single goal: to wipe out humanity and take control of everything. Jack was no longer a fresh recruit. He was a seasoned soldier, one of many who had been thrown into this conflict. The soldiers of humanity were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy who showed no mercy. But they fought because they had no choice. They had to survive. "I need you to hold the line," a commanding officer shouted over the roar of explosions. Hush. Jack could hear the fear in the officer's voice, even as he tried to remain calm. The battle was far from over, and humanity was losing ground, as the enemy's weapons were unlike anything they had ever seen before, energy weapons that burned through metal like it was paper. Jack ran through the trenches, trying to keep his head down, knowing full well that at any moment the next blast could be his last. His team was pinned down, and the enemy was closing in. It wasn't supposed to be this way. They were supposed to have reinforcements by now. But no help came. Humanity had no choice but to keep fighting. "We can't hold this position for much longer," one of the soldiers yelled. But Jack wasn't listening to him. He was looking at the enemy lines. That's when it happened. The aliens launched an assault from above, their massive ships blocking out the sun. Casting a dark shadow over everything below, the world seemed to shake, and then the orders came. "Deploy the weapons. All units activate." The weapons Jack had helped design human-made technology were their last hope. The machines hummed to life, their power coursing through the ground. For the first time in the war, humanity's new weapon was ready. It was their chance to turn the tide, and Jack was part of it. Humanity's weapon was like nothing the aliens had ever seen. Jack continued, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of the memories. "We had to use everything we had, Every piece of technology we could get. Our hands on. Lyra leaned forward, her eyes focused on Jack, hanging on to every word. What happened next? Jack swallowed hard. We fought back. Hard. The humans used everything we had. Our weapons, our tech, our strategies, and we turned the tide. It was a long fight and many people died. But in the end, we were able to push the enemy back. Lyra looked confused, but that's not the story we were told. The stories say that our people were the ones who helped defeat the invaders. We helped the humans, not the other way around. Jack shook his head. That's the story your people want you to believe. The truth is that it wasn't just one side or the other. It wasn't about one race saving another. It was about survival. And in the end, humanity fought alone. ... And we lost so much. Your people weren't the heroes in the way the stories tell you. They had their own war to fight, and we had ours. Lyra felt a knot form in her stomach. She had grown up hearing about the great warriors of her people, those who stood side by side with the humans. But Jack's words made her realize something she had never considered before. The truth was much messier than the legends. She looked at Jack with a new understanding, her mind racing. How did you survive? She asked quietly. How did humanity win? Jack looked out across the peaceful park, as though seeing the battlefield once more. We survived by doing what we had to. By thinking smarter, by sacrificing everything. The war didn't have heroes, Lyra. It had survivors. For a long time there was silence between them. Lyra's mind was spinning. She couldn't quite grasp everything Jack had said. The stories she had grown up with didn't match this reality. But she could see it in his eyes. This man had lived it, and it had changed him. Finally, Lyra spoke. You ... You don't seem like a hero to me, Jack. You seem like someone who saw the truth, someone who lived through hell. Jack met her, gaze a small smile on his lips. I'm not a hero, Lyra. I'm just a man who made it out. I fought because I had no choice. Just like everyone else. Lyra sat back, her head spinning. She had thought she understood the war, the galaxy's history. But now she realized there was so much more to it than she ever imagined. As the wind rustled the leaves around them, she asked softly, What now? What happens to the galaxy after? All that. Jack stood up, looking down at her. We learn from it. We don't repeat it. We move forward. Lyra nodded slowly, knowing that her understanding of her people's history would never be the same again. Lyra stood up, her mind racing with everything Jack had just told her. She couldn't believe it. All humanity had been fighting their own war, and her people had been told a completely different story. The legends her elders had passed down seemed so distant now, so full of holes. She glanced at Jack, who was quietly watching her, waiting for her reaction. Why didn't we know? She asked softly, her voice filled with confusion. Why didn't anyone tell us the truth? Jack took a deep breath, thinking for a moment. It's easier to believe in the stories, Lyra. They make people feel good. They make them think. They were the heroes. But the real story is far more complicated. Some things people don't want to remember. Some truths, ... they're just too painful to face. Lyra looked down at her feet, feeling the weight of his words. She had always been proud of her people's history, their part in the war. But now everything felt uncertain. She had spent her whole life hearing about how they had helped humanity, how they were the ones who saved the day. But Jack's story was different. I need to understand more, she said after a long silence. If humanity was fighting alone, how did you survive? How did you win? Jack looked up at the sky, his expression distant. We weren't alone, not completely. We had our allies, sure, but the real turning point came when we realized we couldn't rely on anyone else. We had to become resourceful. We had to fight smarter, not just harder. Lyra nodded, her curiosity only growing. And the weapons. You said humanity had something that the invaders had never seen before. Jack smiled faintly. Yes, our weapons were a game changer. But it wasn't just the weapons themselves. It was how we used them. The invaders underestimated us. They thought they could wipe us out easily, but they didn't count on the human spirit. We learned quickly, adapted, and started using the environment against them. We had a way of turning their own tactics against them. Lyra could see the passion in Jack's eyes as he spoke. She had never heard a human speak with such conviction before. There was a deep pride in his voice, but also a sadness, as if the memories of what they had to do were too much to carry. But that's just the battle, Jack continued. The real story, the one they don't talk about, is the toll it took. On everyone, we lost so many people. I lost friends, people I fought beside. And in the end, the victory felt hollow. The cost of winning was too high. Lyra's heart sank. She had always believed that winning the war had been the ultimate goal, the thing that would make everything worthwhile. But now, hearing Jack's words, she wasn't so sure. What happened to your people after the war? Lyra asked. What did humanity do once it was all over? Jack paused, his face darkening. We rebuilt, of course. But it wasn't easy. After losing so much, the last thing anyone wanted was more fighting. There were a lot of questions, a lot of anger. People were trying to heal, but it's hard to heal when the scars are so deep. We became more cautious, more defensive.
It was.
Like everyone was waiting for the next war to start, even though we had just ended one. Lyra could see the weight of the past on Jack. He wasn't just telling her a story. He was sharing a part of himself that had been hidden for so long. She didn't know what to say. The world she had known seemed so different now, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for the humans who had been through so much. But we can't change the past, can we? Lyra said quietly. No, Jack replied, his voice barely above a whisper. But we can learn from it. That's what we have to do. The past is full of mistakes, but we can make sure we don't repeat them. Lyra nodded, her mind racing with everything Jack had shared. She had always thought of her people as the brave warriors, the ones who had helped humanity. But now she saw the truth. Her people weren't just heroes. They were survivors, just like humanity. They had their own struggles, their own history that hadn't been told in the stories. I need to show this to my people, Lyra said after a long pause. I need to make them understand. The stories have been wrong all along. Maybe we need to rewrite our history. The truth has to come out. Jack looked at her with a mixture of surprise and caution. Are you sure about that? The truth isn't always easy to accept. You could change everything, Lyra. Your people may not want to hear it. I don't care, Lyra said, her voice firm. I need to know the truth, and my people deserve to know it too. Jack gave her a long, thoughtful look before nodding. You're right, but be careful. Sometimes the truth can cause more harm than good. Lyra didn't say anything more. She had made up her mind. She couldn't live with the lies anymore. She had to know what had really happened, and she had to make her people see the truth. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready for the fight. As they sat in the quiet park, the wind gently rustling the leaves, Lyra felt a sense of determination she hadn't known before. She didn't know what would come of her mission, but she couldn't keep walking in the shadows of lies. Jack had shown her the truth, and now she had to do something with it. The galaxy had been shaped by wars, by pain, and by loss. But now it was time for change, and Lyra was ready to face it head-on. The next day, Lyra couldn't stop thinking about everything Jack had told her. She was still in shock. The truth about the war had changed everything she thought she knew. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath her, and now she had to find out more. She couldn't just leave things as they were. The past was filled with lies, and she needed to uncover the truth not just for herself, but for her people. Jack had agreed to help her, but he had warned her that the truth wouldn't be easy to find. He had mentioned something about an old archive, a place where the history of the war was kept hidden, far away from the public eye. Lyra was determined to go there. They traveled to the outskirts of the city, where the buildings became fewer and the landscape grew more rugged. The journey wasn't easy, but Lyra didn't care. She had a purpose now, and nothing was going to stop her. Jack was quiet as they walked together, his thoughts clearly on the task ahead. Eventually, they reached an ancient structure, half buried in the ground, its stone walls weathered by time. The place was old, much older than anything Lyra had ever seen. It looked abandoned, but she knew better than to trust appearances. Jack had told her this was where they would find the answers. I've been here before, Jack said quietly, his voice carrying a sense of unease. But it's not exactly a place I wanted to revisit. Lyra glanced at him, sensing his discomfort. You don't have to come if it's too hard for you. Jack gave a half-smile. I'm already here. Let's get this over with. They entered the building, their footsteps echoing in the silent halls. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of old paper and metal lingered in the air. The walls were lined with shelves full of old books and data disks, many of them covered in a thick layer of dust. It was a forgotten place, hidden from the public, just like the truth Lyra was searching for. Jack led her to a metal door at the far end of the room. He entered a code, and the door opened with a soft click. Inside was a small, dimly lit room filled with strange technology that Lyra didn't recognize. In the center of the room stood a large console with a holographic interface. This is it, Jack said, his voice low. Everything we need is in here. The real history of the war. Lyra stepped forward, her heart racing. She had been expecting to find some hidden records, but seeing the actual technology used to store the past was overwhelming. The console hummed to life as Jack pressed a few buttons, and a holographic map appeared in front of them. It showed a complex web of connections between different military units, political leaders, and battles. This is the war in its raw form, Jack said, his eyes scanning the holographic map. Everything that happened, all the decisions that were made, ... It's all here. But be warned, Lyra, this is not the clean, easy story your people have been told. The truth is messy. It's full of mistakes, betrayal, and sacrifices. Lyra nodded, her eyes focused on the hologram. Was ready. She had to know what really happened. Jack began accessing the records, pulling up information about the key battles and strategies used by humanity. Lyra watched as the details unfolded before her eyes. The battles were brutal, the losses staggering. The humans had fought with everything they had, using every available resource to survive. But they hadn't won because they were stronger. Had won because they had no choice but to outsmart their enemies. As Jack moved through the data, Lyra's heart sank. The truth was far worse than she had imagined. Her people hadn't just fought alongside humanity. They had watched from the sidelines, waiting for a chance to enter the war. And when they did, it was not to help humanity, but to secure their own place in the galaxy. Lyra stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process the information. The records showed that her people had been in the war, but they had never been the shining heroes they had been made out to be. They had been just like everyone else, trying to survive, trying to secure their own future. Jack watched her closely, his face unreadable. I know it's hard to accept, but this is the truth. Your people had their own goals, their own agenda. They didn't come to help humanity. They came to help themselves. Lyra felt a lump form in her throat. The stories she had grown up with, the stories that had made her proud of her heritage, were all lies. Her people hadn't been the saviors. They had been part of the struggle, just like everyone else. They had fought for their own survival, just like humanity. But we still helped, Lyra said, her voice trembling. We still fought in the war, even if it wasn't for the right reasons. Jack nodded slowly. Yes, you fought. But it wasn't out of kindness or honor. It was out of necessity. Your people did what they had to, just like humanity. But the truth is, your history, it's not the same as the one they've told you. And it never was. Lyra's mind was spinning. She felt betrayed by the history she had been taught, by the lies that had been passed down through generations. She had always believed that her people were heroes, but now she saw the truth. They had fought for their own survival, just like the humans. There were no true heroes and war-only survivors. I don't know what to do with this, Lyra whispered, her eyes fixed on the hologram. Jack placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to do anything yet, Lyra. Take your time. But the truth is here, and now you know it. What you do with it is up to you. Lyra stood there, her heart heavy with the weight of the knowledge she had just uncovered. The truth was a burden, but it was also the only way forward. She had to decide what to do with it, and she knew that her people might never be ready to hear it. But she couldn't turn back now. The war had shaped everything, and the truth was the only thing that could set them free. The journey back to Lyra's homeworld was long and quiet. As they traveled, Jack could feel the weight of the truth they had uncovered, pressing down on him. It wasn't just the war they had revealed. It was everything that followed. Learned the hard truths, but now she had to decide what to do with them. Lyra sat across from him, her eyes distant, staring out of the window as the stars passed by. She hadn't said much since they left the hidden archives. Jack knew she was processing everything, but he also understood the challenge ahead. This was going to change everything for her people. The history they had built their identity on would be shattered.
Yes.
And Lyra would be the one to carry that burden. "We're almost there," Jack said, breaking the silence. Lyra nodded, but didn't respond. She was still lost in her thoughts, and Jack didn't want to push her. He had been through his own struggles with the past, and he knew how overwhelming it could be. When they finally arrived, the capital city of her planet greeted them with its grand structures and bustling streets. Lyra had grown up here, surrounded by the stories of her people's victories, but now everything seemed different. The city didn't feel like the home she had always known. It felt like a place full of lies, and that made her uncomfortable. "I need to speak with the council," Lyra said, her voice steady but firm. "I need to show them what we've learned. The truth can't stay hidden anymore." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure you're ready for that? The council won't like hearing what you have to say." Lyra turned to look at him. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. My people need to know the truth. Can't keep living in the past." Jack didn't argue. He understood what Lyra was feeling. He had fought to uncover the truth for his own people, and now she was doing the same for hers. But he also knew that the truth wasn't always welcomed. It could cause division, anger, and even violence. They made their way to the council building, a towering structure made of glass and stone. Inside, the council members were waiting for them.
The room
Was filled with important leaders from all parts of Lyra's planet, their eyes watching her closely. They had heard rumors of what Lyra had found, but they didn't know the full extent of it. Lyra stepped forward, her heart racing. She had rehearsed her speech 100 times, but now, standing before the council, the words didn't seem enough. She had to make them understand. She had to make them see the truth, even if they didn't want to. "I've come to speak about the war," Lyra began, her voice steady despite the nerves running through her. "The war that shaped our history, our identity, and our place in the galaxy. But what we've been told all these years is a lie." The room fell silent. The council members exchanged worried glances. Some looked at Lyra with concern, others with suspicion. "Lyra, what are you talking about?" one of the elders asked. "The war was a turning point for our people. It made us strong. We helped humanity. We stood together in the face of destruction." Lyra shook her head. "That's not what happened. Humanity wasn't saved by us. They fought their own war. They didn't need us to save them. They fought for survival, just like we did. And the history we've been taught is incomplete. The truth is far more complicated." Jack stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I was there, fought in that war. And I can tell you that the records your people have are incomplete. They show your people as heroes, but that's not the full story. Your people fought for their own survival, just like humanity did. There were no true heroes, only survivors." Lyra watched the council members closely. She could see the shock in their eyes, the disbelief. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected to hear that the legends they had lived by were nothing more than stories. One of the council members stood up, his face red with anger. "This is madness. We fought beside the humans. We helped them. We're the reason they survived. You dare question our history?" Lyra took a deep breath. She had expected this reaction, but it still hurt. People had built their identity on these lies, and now they were being asked to face the truth. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it was one that had to be taken. "I'm not questioning our people's strength," Lyra said, her voice calm but firm. "But we can't keep pretending that we were the saviors. We have to face the reality of what happened. We fought for survival, just like humanity. We did what we had to do. But we can't keep rewriting the past. It's time to move forward. Room was filled with murmurs, some of approval, others of doubt. The council members didn't know how to respond. Lyra could feel the tension in the air. She had shaken the foundation of everything they believed in, and now they didn't know how to handle it. Finally, the oldest council member, a woman with silver hair, spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of years of wisdom. Lyra, what you're asking is not easy. It's not just about changing the stories we've been telling for generations. It's about changing everything we've built. But perhaps you're right. Perhaps it's time for the truth to come out. Lyra stared at her, unsure if she had heard correctly. You think so? The woman nodded slowly. The truth may be difficult, but it's the only way we can move forward. We can't change the past, but we can shape our future. And that future, it can be one of unity, not division. We don't need to be heroes, Lyra. We just need to be honest with ourselves. Lyra felt a weight lift off her chest. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in this. The truth wasn't going to destroy them, was going to set them free. We'll work together, the woman continued, to help our people understand, to help them see the truth. Lyra smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in days. She had taken the first step, and now it was time for her people to follow. The past was behind them, and a new future was waiting to be built. It wouldn't be easy, but Lyra was ready to lead the way. The days after Lyra's speech to the council passed in a blur. There were meetings, discussions, and many sleepless nights as the council tried to figure out how to handle the truth Lyra had uncovered. The planet was on the edge of a major shift, and not everyone was ready to face the changes. Lyra had expected some resistance, but the reaction was more intense than she anticipated. Some of the council members wanted to bury the truth again, to pretend it never existed. But there were others, like the wise elder who had stood by her, who saw the potential for a new future. They were the ones who helped Lyra keep moving forward, even when the weight of their history felt like it would crush her as the days went on. More and more people began to listen to Lyra's story. The truth spread beyond the council, through the streets and into the homes of the people. Some were angry, some were confused, but others felt a sense of relief. The lies they had been told for so long were finally being replaced with the reality of what had truly happened. But it wasn't just the people of Lyra's world who were reacting. News of the revelations spread across the galaxy, reaching human colonies and alien systems alike. Humanity, too, was forced to reckon with the truth they had long ignored. For years, they had seen their part in the war as a heroic struggle, a shining example of resilience. But now, they had to admit that the truth was more complicated, that they had been both victims and aggressors, and that their story was not as clear-cut as they had believed. Lyra sat in her room staring out the window at the stars. The city. Outside was alive with energy, but inside, she felt a deep calm. She had done it. She had opened the door to the truth, and now there was no going back. But she wasn't afraid anymore. The weight of the past no longer had control over her. She had made the first step toward a better future. Jack stood beside her, his arms crossed as he looked at the stars with her. He had been there for her every step of the way, helping her navigate the difficult path she had chosen. He was the only one who truly understood what it was like to face the truth. To come to terms with a past that was full of mistakes. You did it, Jack said, breaking the silence. You got them to listen. Lyra nodded, but she didn't feel the excitement she thought she would. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about finding a way forward. We all did, she replied softly. This isn't just my victory. It's everyone's. The people of this planet deserve to know the truth. They deserve to decide who they really are, not just who they've been told they are. Jack looked at her with admiration. You've got courage, Lyra. I've seen a lot of people fight wars, but you're fighting for something different. You're fighting for the truth. Lyra smiled faintly, her eyes still focused on the stars. It's not just about the truth, though. It's about healing. We can't move forward until we stop clinging to a past that was built on lies. We have to accept who we really are, flaws, mistakes, and all. Jack nodded, his expression serious. I know what you mean. I've seen the consequences of holding on to the past too tightly. Sometimes the only way to truly move forward is to let go of everything you thought you knew. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes thoughtful. Do you ever regret it? Your part in the war? Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out at the stars, as though searching for something out there in the vastness of space. I regret the things I had to do, the people I couldn't save. But I don't regret fighting. I don't regret trying to make a difference. Lyra nodded slowly, understanding. I think that's all we can do. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we live in the present. We can choose how we shape the future. Jack smiled, a rare, genuine smile. You've learned a lot in a short time, Lyra. I think you're going to do great things. Lyra smiled back, but it wasn't the smile of someone who had just won a victory. It was the smile of someone who had found peace. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, questions, and opposition. But she also knew that the truth was the only way forward. The next few weeks were filled with more debates, discussions, and even protests. But slowly, the people of Lyra's world began to accept the truth. They were no longer living in the shadow of false legends. Instead, they were starting to build a new history, one that was grounded in reality. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Humanity, too, began to change. The realization that their part in the war wasn't as heroic as they had believed sparked a movement for self-reflection. No longer would they view their past through the lens of glory. Instead, they would strive to understand the complexities of their actions, to learn from their mistakes, and to work toward a better future. And in the midst of it all, Lyra stood strong. She wasn't just a messenger anymore. She had become a leader, someone who had the courage to speak the truth and to face the consequences of that truth. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. Humanity and her people would never be the same again. The galaxy was changing, and it was up to people like Lyra to shape that change. It wasn't just about the war anymore. It was about building a future where the truth mattered, where healing was possible, and where both humans and aliens could coexist in a world without lies.